Good evening, everyone. Today, we are honored to have Professor Perez to give us a talk on global history. Now, I studied history in my undergraduate program, but we always study it independently. That means we do not always connect the Chinese history with Western history. Okay, so even if we talk about Manuel Ricci, we always say that he worked in China, but we don't make connection with his European tradition. So that's why I think Professor Perez's topic would be very inspiring for us. And I know that in universities in China, a lot of people are doing this new area, the global history. So that's that's why I think it's this topic would be very interesting to all of you and me. Let me first give a little bit introduction to Professor Perez. Professor Perez is currently tenured associate professor at Shanghai Jiao Tong University. You're from my hometown.
Oh, really? Nice.
And he held different positions in Spain and in China, including two best universities in China, Renmin University and Tsinghua University. And he obtained his PhD at the European University Institute in Italy. He recently published a book titled Global History with Chinese Characteristics, Autocratic States Along the Silk Road in the Decline of the Spanish and the Qing Emperors. Another new book, which is also released in 2021, is titled Blood, Land and Power, The Rise and the Fall of the Spanish Nobility in the Lineage in the Early Modern Period. So now let's welcome Professor Professor Perez to give us this talk.
Okay, thank you. You can hear me, guys? Well, I can scream. So, well, first of all, I really thank you, Barry, for the nice presentation. And of course, Stefan, for making possible again this talk and invitation, Father Jarek and all the staff, of course, Sophia, Brian, all the staff of the Ricci Institute, which is, we know each other for many years. And I can say that it's my family in Macau. Because, being the first time I came to Macau to give a talk to the Ricci Institute, it was in 2012, when you guys were not in the seminar, but in the city center, besides the library. So since then, we've been in touch with the fathers and also with the researchers in the Institute. So I really appreciate again. I'm so happy to be here with you after all these 3 years nearly of bad time we really had. Last time I came was in 2019. So, okay, for today's talk, by the way, how much time do I have? Maybe we are a small group, maybe 1 hour. I'm gonna try to make it shorter. So since we are a small group, I mean, here in the classroom, but also the people online, anytime, please stop me if you have any question or doubt. So let's try to make it a little bit interactive. So, and since Jarek already read my book, so you can rip me out or criticize. So let's not make it very friendly. So you can, any disagreement, actually, guys, I really recommend you to disagree with me. So nearly for 1 hour, I'm gonna talk about global encounters between China and Europe, comparative study on economic history, transnational trade networks and consumption, having as a main case study Macau and Marseille from precisely this period, 1680 until 1840. For those who are not familiar with, is in China the so-called High Qing period, Senqing, which goes from Kangxi Emperor to Qianlong. Or basically, we finished the project in 1840 with the Emperor Doguan in the dawn of the First Opium War. This little book I'm going to talk a bit about later is one of the main results of this project. which was funded by the by the ERC, the European Research Council, from the European Commission. So it was a big project, GSM project, Global Encounters between China and Europe. We have here our logo, which is the Qianlong Tongbao, the copper and silver coins that were circulated globally in this period. And precisely on that is the main role of Macau as a main entrepot and magnet of American silver into China during the Qing dynasty. So let's kick on it. So basically the main outline for my presentation would be give you some lines, some theoretical framework on the main contents of this result of this research and presentation. And therefore I will present you the case study comparison. Rather than a comparison, is a connected history. We can discuss on this about later. The main hypothesis and questions to answer in this research. And finally, methodology and sources. So for one of the jewels of this project, and I also will give you later the link. And by the way, I think I should have sent it to Jarek and to Father Stefan, because we have made an online database, open access. We have registered in that database more than 40,000 registered of global trade in China, from Manila, Canton, Macau, Seville in Europe. So those you can, I'm gonna give you the link. It is open access, so you can use it for your research. It's been one of the main results of this 5-6 years of project. And then I will give you some conclusions. So first, one of the concepts that we need to rethink for this research is about how we understand globalization in economic history. There are now much talk about globalization. What is the meaning of globalization? And of course, it is a postmodern concept after World War II, basically in the collapse, in the aftermath of the collapse of the Soviet Union and the fall of the Berlin Wall. But globalization, there is an academic debate about this. When globalization started, actually, I'm not a friend to put dates when globalization started. Here, there is this date, but some scholars like Dennis Flynn and Arturo Giraldet, who has working on the Manila Acapulco galleons, they say that globalization started in 1517. Well, why this year? Why should be 1571? Do you guys have any idea why they have chosen this year to that globalization began? It is because in this year, it was when the Manila Acapulco galleon was officially established as a trade route in the Pacific at the Spanish Empire. So it's been said that because of this, then America, South China, Europe gain interconnection because of this global trade. So that's why they say that globalization began in this year, but I'm not, not very much friend on this. So because globalization started since the Earth's surface gained permanent connection after more than 10,000 years of mutual isolation after the end of the last ice age. So let's say that globalization is more on a geographical but not ideological definition. Because now there is much debate going on since it is a postmodern concept that all this globalization is because of this big powers, geopolitical discourse at the present moment, but that is not the real meaning and use of the concept of globalization in this research. It is an operational geographical definition that we use. And I define myself that globalization, it could be defined as the drama of hunger, since the constant movement of people seeking prosperity, since the Roman Empire or the old Mesopotamia or in Egypt empire. So that could be, if we have to put a date, when globalization started. So it's not like several years ago or even centuries. Another important theoretical concept to and debate, historiographical debate we need to consider here is the debate and research by the California School, who rewrite basically with the starting of the Ken Pomeranz and Andre Gunther Frank work on the Great Divergence. They rewrite the economic history of China, the debate, the rise of the West, or basically they combat or go against the Eurocentric perspective when we are talking about comparisons with China or East Asia. So here are some names of the main California scholars, Ken Pomeranz, Jack Goldstone, or Roy Winborn, who has been putting on the accent on China and East Asia at the end of the 90s, at the beginning of the new millennium, to combat again this strong Eurocentric perspective. So the reevaluation in the research I'm presenting here is the reevaluation of the Great Divergence and how can we normalize data and information, creating new cluster and mining new data to answer this question: why some economies grow faster than others in the case of this big gap between Western European regions and East Asia. Basically, one of the main concerns, as you can see here, this is with the data of Angus Marison from the Netherlands, from the University of Groningen and the Dutch school, who has basically working on using data basically from GDP, doing backwards projection from year zero, backward projection from 1919 until year zero, but this doesn't work properly. But for you to understand the meaning of the Great Divergence, normally until the beginning of the conquest of the America, the world economies were more or less at the same level in terms of GDP per capita. But because of the discovery of the America, there was this dramatic rising and boom in France, Germany, United Kingdom, and China, India, Japan stood behind. So this big gap is the so-called Great Divergence. But how can we answer to this question with new data? So basically, and here I quote Patrick O'Brien, one of the founding fathers of global history and economic history from LSE and Oxford University, talking that, or stating in his last book, that after 2 decades of much scholarship and intellectual discourse about the Great Divergence, we can say at the present moment that the debate is virtually over. So we need to redirect and try to reformulate the question, whether it's an appropriate question to ask, right? Because we are talking here about Eurocentric perspective. So can we apply the same logic, the same type of question from China to Europe, using as a main anchor the first industrial revolution, when, according to the California School, the Great Divergence started? So this is what Patrick O'Brien is discussing here, that we need to redirect the debate with new case studies, again, to combat both currents, the Eurocentric, but also the Sinocentric, which is also very important. In this particular, because of the current, I don't need to talk much about it, because of the current political momentum, being China, Zhongguo as a center in the political and geopolitical discourse. So how can we think about global studies within such strong political perspective? And basically talking about neo-national narratives, because we are talking about global history. We are talking about how to implement comparisons between the West and the East regions, right? But we are, in the past 10 years, also in the past 5 years, these national narratives, this political agenda has been permeated in the academic scientific research. So this is something really dangerous that happened. And here I quote the work by Jeremy Adelman. There is an ethno-nationalism through a political supremacist program, populism, anti-globalization movements, stressing the so-called neo-national narratives of not talking even about China, Nation X, So we can talk about Spain, we can talk about Venezuela, we can talk about China, we can talk about Great Britain. So this nationalism is permeating, making a very strong influence in the academic research. One of the examples is the influence in geopolitics and academia about the One Belt, One Road, the Idailu or the Chongguo-Tese policy in the case of China. And therefore, under such framework, we need first reformulate the great divergence debate with new case studies and also overcome the national narratives or the neo-national narratives at the present moment with, here I call it the new global history. And how can we implement new global history studies? First, within an interdisciplinary approach, we are not talking about Eurocentrism. We need to combat Eurocentric perspective, Sinocentric perspective, even American-centric perspective, because in the case of, for you who are familiar with Latin American history, now because of this national historical debates in Latin America and also about the Black legend for the case of the Spanish Empire. So those who are, let's say, legitimate to do the history of Venezuela or Colombia, if I do that, I would be crushed because I'm the Spanish conquistador. So in terms of the political agenda, is a specific group of scholars for them who are those legitimate to do this type of history. Again, therefore, going beyond these centrisms, Euro, Sino, or America, the approaches should be under a polycentric basis. So not dominant space, but seeking connections globally within local areas and long distance geography, east, west, north, south. And how can we do that? Through the so-called clear geographical application, the so-called jeu d'échelle or game of scales, which has been used by the Annales school or by the French school from a micro and micro perspective. And therefore is how can we, the way we can strongly criticize the globalization putting years and dates. Again, globalization started many centuries, millenniums ago. It's not like here, Kevin O'Rourke and Jeff Williamson, the main economic historians from Harvard University and Oxford University, they put also another date in 80-20s when they believe that market integration provoke a price convergence on a big, large scale. So they say, according to their theory, that globalization started in 1820. But again, I'm totally against all these dates. The way to do this and to implement this new global history should be, again, collaboration doing academic networks. Basically, that part of it, what we are doing here with the researchers and the Ricci Institute, collaboration, academic network, training in Western and non-Western languages. You guys have here, which is also one of the main places I always come here to work, and I've been working yesterday and today there in the historical archive of Macao. Very rich, really abundant historical sources in Portuguese, European language, but also Chinese. So for implementing our research agenda, definitely we need better training to read non-Western sources in Western and non-Western languages. Digitalization of sources using digital methods. Here I'm going to present you the relational database we have used. Precisely, we are doing with this big canvas, scattered sources in Chinese, Portuguese, French, English. So how can we normalize? How can we order the information? Not just simply to collect data, but to answer the question we are formulating in our research. So that is one of the main issues I'm gonna present to you. Precisely doing and implementing new case studies and comparative and interdisciplinary methodology. That is the main and the core to implement and to apply the so-called new global economic history and through new case studies. I present Macau, Marseille. You may ask, why Macau? Why Marseille? I'm going to tell you later, but you can take any other example. Why no Xiamen in Fujian with Manila, or Xiamen with Lima in Peru? That would be a very beautiful one to see the connectivity between South America and South China. And it makes sense because the big amounts of silver, American silver at that time as a big world currency, the 2/3 of silver production went to China through the Manila-Acapulco galleon, and that silver didn't go to Europe, to Spain or Portugal. So it could be, as many of those, a beautiful case study. Xiamen, Lima in Peru. So you have here a huge canvas of new case studies. So in my case, how can we, again, we're talking about the Western or Europe, it's a very big general and big geographical concept. So the proper way to approach on this is first mining new historical data to approach to the great divergence debate from a very regional basis. So global history started from the local. The most important thing is to formulate the proper and accurate question. So global history could start from the very local basis here in Macau and the historical archive in Macau. Have a lot of abundant, beautiful sources that we can make very nice case studies. Of course, for that we need an army of researchers. Therefore, a method, a multi-relational database, I'm going to introduce you. Case study. Basically, what I'm dealing with is consumer chain and the analysis of consumer behavior, trade networks, basically merchants, people that were in charge of trading, connecting both geographies. South China, the economic axis connecting Macau and Canton, with Europe, but basically Western Mediterranean Europe, Marseille and Seville. Marseille in South France, Seville in South Spain as a main entry, connecting the Atlantic and Mediterranean market. But what about the Pacific? So Manila, in the middle of the Pacific, acted as a main lynching. So you can see we have here this big triangle. And the main hypothesis is that I formulate here with one example, as many we can choose, like Chinese silks, is the effect of Chinese silks in were changing local consumption and production in Western Mediterranean economies. So we will go in detail about this. So this is the main thesis for the formulation. Therefore, the most important thing is to pay more attention to the local economic dynamics in which we can reformulate this great divergence debate from a micro to perspective, and choosing as a regional variables consumption of specific typologies of goods, trade networks, the functioning of the families, the whole school economy, the main individuals that were undertaking business as a main intermediators. Here we need to consider that the South China Sea was a very unregulated market. There was no maritime law at that time. Still today it's quite difficult to see the functioning. So there was a huge chaos, a very rich and profitable market. So how can make order in that market? So the most important thing here is the social network analysis. So talking about comparisons, again, ancient empires, the Qin Empire, 1644, and the Habsburg, later the Spanish Bourbon, Philip II. So they create a complex administrative system and bureaucracy. It's good and bad. Very good for us as historians, because we have oceans of data, abundant sources because of this complex system and administration. On the other side, they create a very inefficient bureaucratic system, which goes precisely in terms of the geographical variable I mentioned before. Talking about the Chinese Empire, Chongguo, as the Middle Kingdom, the most important thing to consider here, all this map is the Qin expansion to the west. So the light green represent the Ming dynasty map. And this is something very important to consider. First, the Qin Empire has no overseas expansion, right? And another important thing for us to consider later is that the Qin was a Manchu dynasty, a foreign dynasty ruling the Han. Therefore, the Han, who are part of the Ming, they were talking always, they didn't recognize the Qin, but they were always talking about the Daming Wall, the great Ming. So they didn't recognize the Qin. And comparing with European empires, the case of the Spanish Empire, the Spanish and Portuguese Empire, they have a more overseas maritime orientation, the so-called composite monarchy defined by John Eliot to define the European, but basically the Spanish and Portuguese Empire. So here, two concepts. The Qin Empire, no overseas expansion. The European, like the Spanish and Portuguese, the main orientation is the maritime overseas expansion to extract the main resources like raw material and energy sources for the industrialization. And therefore, again, another reference here is about the Great Divergence debate. And within this package of the new case studies, the most important concern in our research is to redefine the Great Divergence debate to find new answers to the big question. So again, talking about the empires, maritime expansion by the European empires, and it is by Ken Pomeranz in the book The Great Divergence, published in 2000. So he defined, again, this is the big gap, the so-called Great Divergence. So Pomeranz formulated the so-called luck theory. What is the meaning of that? That Europe was so lucky to encounter the Americas, who served as a main booster for the Britain, France, basically for the Northwestern economies in Europe to develop faster, and Japan, China, and India stood behind. You can see here that before the discovery of the Americas, the real income per capita was more or less equal. So after the discoveries of the Americas, especially Great Britain, undertook this big boom in their economy. So according to Pomeranz thesis, that is the luck theory for finding new resources, energy resources, primary and raw material that help the main powers on Europe for the industrialization. But again, more case studies are needed. The approach, as I mentioned before, is the jeu de shell I apply. So going from a purely comparative approach to ones that we are seeking more connection. Therefore, our approach is more defined as a global conjunctures. So the joints, the intertwined history, the connections between Macau, Canton, Marseille in Europe, and therefore the chronological approach used is 1680, since the arrival of the Kangxi Emperor to the throne, the so-called High Qing period, until 1840, in that one, the first Opium War. And the main hypothesis is that merchants acted as a mediators for the introduction of new commodities, new global goods that were changing consumer behavior in local economies in both in the West, Europe and Americas, but also in China. Merchant is a very big concept. So when we are talking about merchant, who are we talking with? Different social actors from different backgrounds. We'll talk on this later. But basically, why Marseille and why Macau? The two main entrepôts in South China and South Europe that promote and foster global trade. Basically, this global trade is the global consumption, or what I call the differential consumption. Chinese goods in the West, silk, tea, porcelain from Jindegen. So this is the main typologies we are studying in this project, but also the introduction in China of American goods. Basically, during Ming Dynasty, chili, corn, or the Huolongguo, the dragon fruit, and also silver, enter China from the Americas. But what about European goods? So we have a huge set of goods, many of those luxury goods, like British clocks. Qianlong Emperor in the Forbidden City have a huge pavilion of collection of European clocks, French mirrors, but basically, and more importantly, wine. So Macau and Canton were a huge market in Qing Dynasty for the introduction of European wines and liquors from France, Portugal, and Spain. So at the beginning of the project, when talking and discussing with my Chinese colleagues and also other colleagues of mine, historians, they would say, no, in China, they didn't consume wine during the early modern period, 17th or 18th century. Say, no, you are crazy. No, there is a huge consumption of this, and I'm gonna show you the empirical data. They say, okay, they may consume wine, but basically it was, of course, for religious purposes when the Jesuits arrived in the 16th century. But there are much more other uses than the pure religious purposes. And on this, precisely, who regulate these markets? In South China and South Europe, in the Mediterranean, but basically in South China. So here I formulate, which you can see in the book, in this one, which also you have access online. I formulate the power paradox theory. What is the meaning of this theory? To summarize, it means that authoritarian and interventionist states driven by power accumulation in terms of political, socioeconomic, cultural sphere, entail a weak governance, therefore, a weak state capacity. So this is the main, and we have here on two different concepts. What is the paradox itself? Is what I define the supremacy dilemma. Either states concentrate power under autocratic rules. Actually, this is happening today in many cases. And actually, this power paradox theory we can apply in Qing China, the Bourbon European Spanish Empire, Roman Empire, or we can apply it today to analyze the current politics in Spain. Of course, Spain is the paradigm of this autocratic system, as many of others. So either they are focusing on concentrated power under autocratic rules, or the other thing is to adopt a less interventionist measure to foster market-driven economy based on innovation, and therefore for a more efficient distribution of wealth. But of course, we do that. We are not talking about politics. Politicians are precisely on the other way, concentration of power. And what are the key functions of the state and his capacity to extract resources, create administrative structure to manage the economic resources, and therefore this theory have a long-term projection across geographies, time, polities, to analyze the centralization and accumulation of power. So how can we identify these features of autocratic system? Again, identifying restricted institutions, formation of monopolies, rising bureaucracy, coercion, formation of new rich elites, and disputes, for the case of China, between rich, the new merchants elite, and the ruling elite, the Qing rulers, the Manchu rulers in Beijing, versus the Han merchants from Fujian and Guangdong. So that is one of the essential features, not only to understand in China, in Qing China, the power paradox theory, but also in the long term to understand and review the real meaning of the First Opium War. An example of this autocratic restrictive institution, monopolies. One of them is the Canton system, Ikotongshan, established by Qianlong in 1757. The home merchants is as main rich elite in South China. The so-called Hanshan operating in the 13 factories under the Canton system, the Xishan Han, that operate in the Pearl River Delta, only a small place that were functioning and can allow to undertake overseas trade. That was only Canton. So Canton, right here, was the only port in the Pearl River Delta that was allowed to do international commerce at that time. And of course, Macau, located here, it was a very easy location to supervise the entry of foreign ships into China. So therefore, the state could control what was the main objective, control the trade, the overseas trade in South China. And this is the official statement by Qianlong Emperor when ordered to the governor of Guangdong and Guangxi provinces, Liang Guan Chongdu in 1757, to tell 40 businessmen to only undertake trade in Canton and they are not allowed to go to Ningbo or any other ports in China. And this is from the first historical archives in Beijing, in the Forbidden City. But here, another important concept that we need to review. There is nothing we don't have that we need from you. This statement encapsulates the modern, or even the application of the Westphalian concept and diplomacy in China with the McCartney mission in Qianlong court to Emperor Qianlong at the end of the 90s. And actually this one has a real meaning to understand the geopolitics at that time and also to understand what's going on today in China, because we need to look at the Qing dynasty and until this time to understand the engagement in foreign relations and diplomacy between Western powers and China. So here, Qianlong is giving this message to two audiences. The first, the big economic powers in Europe, Great Britain, mainly, do not interfere in economics, politics, or social affairs in China. This is the first thing, a warning. But the second warning was not for the foreigners or the foreign powers. What meant to the Han majority in China, because the Qing was a Manchu ethnic group ruling, a foreign group ruling the Han. And this message means unification and also certain type of negotiation between the central court in Beijing and the Han in the south, in Fujian and Guangdong as the main rich elite. Actually, the Han merchants and also the Fujian merchants were Han and Hakka ethnic groups. And that was posing a threat to the Qing and the Manchu dynasty itself. And here, we have this interpretation. Actually, this is a cartoon designed by the British press at the end of the 90s in the 18th century. And it was designed even before Qianlong did his voyage to China. It was because of the effects of the Dutch embassy by Hammers some decades ago. So the British in the British Parliament, there was a huge debate that we don't need to engage in commerce with China. We don't need China. So there was political and also the press group in Britain. They didn't want to do this engagement with China. So they designed this cartoon to, let's say, somehow mock the Chinese. But one of the most important debates here, and that was not invention of the British press at that time, is the practice of the koto. The Qing were told to the mission that they must do the koto, which means bow in front of the emperor. But of course, the British say, no, we don't, why? We should bow before you. So either we are equal, but in this particular, the Qing were still operating under the tributary system or supremacy on the main power. So this is one of the main issues here to review. So basically, what we are doing here within this context is to review the socioeconomic and compare within different examples the socioeconomic changes in the 17th, 18th century, imperial Spain and imperial China. What we are doing here is a reevaluation of the practices and business of the global trade during the High Qing period. The arrival of the Bourbon dynasty to the Spanish crown, Actually, the Bourbon is a French dynasty ruling Spain. The Qing, a foreign dynasty, Manchu, ruling China, more or less in the same period, and so-called, in the case of China, the High Qing or the Shang Qing, the high prosperous economic area. Both mercantilist policies in imperial Spain and China. In the case of China, as mentioned before, we have the canton system, only place canton to undertake overseas trade. In the case of Spain, we have Cadiz in South Spain as the only port allowed to overseas trade. And the same, in a similar manner, like the canton system, Spain, the Spanish Empire, in the Philippines established the so-called Royal Company of the Philippines with the aim to regulate trade in China. So that's why Bourbon, the French dynasty ruling or dominating the Mediterranean area, the Mediterranean market in the 18th century. So that's why I choose as a case study Marseille, because Marseille, 18th century, was one of the main ports in the Mediterranean for the redistribution of overseas goods, goods that arrive the Mediterranean from America, but also from Asia. Macau was the main entrepot in South China for the redistribution of overseas goods, not only in China, but also to Japan, the Philippines, and Southeast Asia. On this, the main set of questions is first, how global trade operate in the South China and Western Mediterranean economies. The role of the merchants. Who are these merchants? These people we are talking about. So one of the main group of merchants I'm going to mention is the so-called Sangleyes, which is the Chinese traders in the Philippines. They were calling Sangleyes. And the formation of new elites of power because of this profitable trade and market. And another very important question to formulate is still, how did the capital accumulation, the accumulation of silver by the gentry and merchant elites in Guangdong and Fujian pose a threat, a menace to the Qing official authorities in Beijing as a non-Han dynasty? Therefore, should we still talk about the High Qing period as a prosperous? And second, and more important, two very bold questions we need to reformulate. The Opium Wars as an endogenous economic problem in Qing China. And secondly, this may lead to reevaluate the Opium War through the dimension, through a domestic dimension between the dispute between the Qing rulers in Beijing and the Han elites in South China. Therefore, can we talk as the first Opium War? Not. Of course, the British or the French have an important role, but not many. It's always finding the external enemy, the invisible enemy, because in the theory I sustain is that the Opium War was a civil war in China between the Han and the Manchu elites. So this is, of course, this theory means a kind of, let's say, boon in the historiography, because, you know, it's quite a sensitive issue, but that's why we are researchers. Researcher is to not to please anybody, but to, and also to put and make new question and bold theories. Therefore, we can talk again. The most important issue here is the China market, South China Sea market, as a profitable one. Here we are talking about the new governing dynamics and balance of power in South China Sea, multiple players. We are talking about a frontier of empires, Iberian empires in the Philippines with the Chinese in Macau, and also with Great Britain and France as a main foreign players, the Manchu non-Han elites ruling the China, Han and Hakka ethnic groups dominating the South China markets, European communities in China, missionaries, trade companies, Jesuits, and what about North, the border in Japan and Korea? At the end of the 16th century, the invasion of Japan to Korea. So that is also another important issue to consider. Here, talking about the main actors, players in this trade, is the so-called sangleyes. You may see this word in many recent publications, but basically it's a Spanish transliteration of the word sangre, which means Chinese traders. And in the Boxer Codex, anonymous manuscript of the 16th century, anonymous, it's been said that it was written by the governor of Manila at the end of the 16th century. So there are this representation of ethnic groups in Southeast Asia and in China. And these are the so-called sangles. Let's say, it's a very idealistic and banal representation. But for you to understand and to be familiar with the term sangle, so that is what it means. But basically we are in a whole, what I mentioned here, defined as an Asian Mediterranean brokerage system. So we have a polycentric, we don't have any center or core agents, but we have a very dispersed network based operating into the brokerage system in Macau, Canton, and in Marseille, Seville, with the traders, the home traders of Canton, the grill company, the Swedish grill company operating here in Macau, and having several big, medium, and subsidiary companies operating all over these geographies in South America, Acapulco, Lima, France, Marseille, in North European markets, in Sweden, and also in the Mediterranean. So we have this that promoted the circulation of goods, exchanging of silver, and letters of credit. So is how this trade was operating and working. And here, another important document I found in the Archivo General de Indies, in the General Archive of Indies in Spain. This one of indicators of this power paradox theory in the 16th century in Manila, in the Spanish Empire, in which the Chinese traders were denouncing to the Spanish king extortion, abuse of power, defaulting of payments, and also the most important thing here was the access to information to participate in the network of China market. So this is original writing in Chinese, and here it mentions the names of the sangleyes, of the Chinese traders operating in Manila, and the Spanish translation, which was translated by Dominican Fray Diego. I don't see here could you? Oh. So Fray Miguel de Benavides, the first bishop of the diocese of New Segovia in Manila, did the translation of this letter in Spanish, so denouncing the bad practices by the Spanish officials in Manila to the Chinese, to the sangleyes. But here we have another letter, and this letter is proving I took it from the Historical Archive of Macau, the Swedish collection. Another letter by the governor of the Philippines here denouncing the default in the payment by the broker, the Chinese trader, the sangley in Macau and Canton. He was commissioned, the broker, the Chinese trader, to dispatch some goods, silk through credit from Canton, Macau to Manila, but the partner, the sangley, took the money away, so no goods, no money. So here in words, I quote, of the governor of the Philippines here in the city of Mansilog, replied that the sangley said there were not any goods or money for me. The money the governor of Manila borrowed to his partner. And now I see that you have a certification of my own goods, that someone else a profit of the money that the governor of Manila lent to the partner. And he was exploding in fury. If I didn't see it, and I wouldn't have seen with your own signature, here I wouldn't believe it. So here it says, this is very funny, but I'm in the obligation to believe it or explode in fury. I'm grateful for the favors you made me, and I can only say that you must remember that mountains are not found, but men do. So some way, somehow I will find you for the money I lend you and you run away. So this is one of the main proofs for this power paradox theory. Who can regulate this market? Is totally unregulated. Actually, this morning and yesterday, I was reading in the historical archive of Macau, in the collection of the Santa Casa de Misericordia, because it was acting as a main institution for lending money. So huge list of defaults of payments, money that was borrowed and lent to do business, was the whole Santa Casa, Holy House of Mercy, was in bankrupt. But again, to whom you claim today, to whom you claim when you do business, there is no international treaties for trade or law. There is actually, this is one of my the next project I'm preparing is the peace treaties and the maritime law comparing South China market with Mediterranean market. There is no law, there is no treaty. Everything here in China, in Qing Dynasty, Ming Dynasty, was based on guanxi, on trust and confidence between partners. You cannot go to the emperor to claim this guy has mispaid, has defaulted in the payment. So that's profitable market, unregulated market. The most important thing is the know-how, the so-called know-how to enter in the network. This is what I mean. To enter in the network, this unregulated system was based on the medieval practice of commenda, which comes from the Latin, the commanditas, commandita, which is that I commend you, a partner, to give him a certain amount of money or goods to work and to undertake trade in a long distance. So that was the role of the Sangleyes with the Spanish authorities. And this I apply here through the database of GESEM project. The black nodes represent the companies of Chinese traders. The color one in the margin represents the Europeans, basically the Spanish authorities in Manila. The meaning of this, I will not go enter in the complex explanation of the social network. This is a whole methodology on this, the social network analysis. But for you to visualize here, the marginal position, peripheral position into the network of the colored dots mean that the Spanish officials in Manila, they didn't have any way to enter in the network, to participate in the network, and to have the information and the know-how to properly operate in China market system. So this is one of the main issues. Here, well, this is, I draw here the genealogy of the Grill family of Sweden that were operating here in Macau and Canton. All of this data, I took it from the Macau Historical Archive. Coming very quickly, again, the formation of monopolies, we're talking about the Canton system. Here, another important issue, Canton or Guangdong province connected to Zhejiang and Fujian provinces in the coast of China. In all this area, we are talking about all this business, the silver entering in South China. Yes, the question is, where this silver, this American silver entering in China, where did it go? Well, basically to the Fujian, Zhejiang, and Guangdong families, lineages, and new rich merchants elites. Here, for you guys to have a little idea about this profitable market and the huge amount of silver accumulated by the Han merchants in Canton, accumulated for this for this year at the beginning of the 19th century, the total amount in tiles in silver, and the main merchant families here in Canton, the Ponqua, Etching, Monqua, Houqua. This also has been very well studied by Paul Van Dyke. So it's just to give you a snapshot of this huge amount of silver just for a couple of years. So imagine how much they could accumulate in more than 10 years. The same here, the three families, basically the Yan, the Taihan, Shuqua, and Saiqiu, that they were participating or doing trade with the English, French, Danish, Swedish, Dutch, and Portuguese East India companies. Huge amount and profitable market. And here I discovered really nice new documentation contracts of land sales in Zhejiang and Anhui provinces, in these two little areas in Zhejiang and Xichang village, in village close to the coast and connected Anhui, which is where the Huizhou traders were operating at the end of Ming and Qing dynasty. And all this amount of silver through the lane, through the contract of land sale here by the Ke and Pan lineages, it was basically for laundering the silver accumulated by these families in Zhejiang to avoiding precisely the supervision of the Qing state. So what they were doing here, these are contract of land sales that I took here for the new documents that we have at the Chinese database in Shanghai Jiaotong University. So basically, all money that were entering through trade, silver, they were selling land, therefore avoiding or let's say hiding the traces of this silver. And what they were doing in the next 2 years, they were reselling the land because by law, by local law, they have to sell it for higher price. So untrustable system, and actually the Qing state in many of those land sales, it gives them to make it legal, the sale, the stamp, the imperial official stamp to make the transaction legal. So they were bypassing the state supervision precisely on all this silver that was entering in South China. And another thing, what they did is they were buying the exams to enter in the imperial examination system, the so-called Keju, to be officials. So from being a low-level merchant, become a rich merchant, and even some of them could buy a title, an official title, to pass the imperial examination system, to having the family in the lineage, the honor. So all of this were made in Fujian, in the counties, in the main counties of Fujian. Again, this is how you can see, precisely because of this global trade, the connections between Macau in South China and Marseille. Macau, in which the Manchus, basically here, Kansi commissioned the levels for the fortification of the island, and Marseille as a main entrepot for the whole circulation of the silk, as one of the main commodities entering from Asian China markets. Therefore, just for one example to observe the circulation of silver, here we follow the so-called global traces of Chinese silks through the mediation of traders and social actors, through Lisbon, Spain, a Mediterranean market, go through South Africa, Indian markets, and Southeast Asia, Macau, Japan, Philippines, go through the Pacific, the Mediterranean, the American, and therefore again to Europe. So we have this circular, polycentric, no dominant space in which all nodes are equally important. And to ordering this data, so we have here the GESEN database, we have here somewhere the link. Could you? Yes, here you can access the database as open access, so all the data we have collected and information, you have it here. We have actually, created in the last 5-6 years working, we have created a patent for this database, in which, again, I have published also here some articles last year in Oxford University Press in the Digital Humanities Journal about how we did the designing of this database. It's not simply putting an Excel file data, no. There was a huge computer engineering work, and it's a madness. So it's something like that we are working out in the next step is to apply to the data artificial intelligence for data of 200-300 years ago. So it's we are not talking about a Word file, tables, or Excel. No, this is a much more complex thing. And also how to apply this data. Last year, I published in the journal Cliometrica on Economics about how the effect of Chinese goods using the GESEN project database. Again, the logic of the designing of this database, again, we have huge amount of historical archives, what I call the containers of information, the archive, national archives in Spain, or the historical archives here in Macau, the data in the original books, and how we can make a multi-tracking system to recognize the data. So we make a plan, which is going through the archives, the logical implementation for quantitative analysis, and some example here. Some of the archives we have used in Spain, China, Marseille in France, of course, the historical archive of Macau. Here, data, we are using a probate inventory here, which is the testament of someone before dying, made a list of the possession. This is in Spanish, 18th century language. Here, make a list of the goods of the house, and we identify those made of Chinese silk. So you spend quite a lot of time, even for Spanish people, it's quite difficult to. Here, another type of sources in French, 18th century, even much more complex. In the Archives de la Chambre de Commerce de Marseille, here, ceinture de soie, which is belts made of silk, the amount of the unit, the price of the silk, and then the total amount per year. Another really nice one here from the National Archive of Spain in the collection of in the Philippines and China catalog. We have here goods from China, where Canton, and then here says seda de chancheo, and this is what is this chancheo thing? Again, like the Sangleyes, the Spanish didn't know anything about Chinese language. So imagine 300-400 years ago, a governor or a secretary in Manila that didn't know anything about Chinese, and he has to register the names of the places. So chancheo is a transliteration of the original Chinese name, Chanchou, close to Shanghai and close to Suzhou. And what about these places? The imperial silk factories. So all this area is the main silk export region in China. So we have this many transliteration. Here another transliteration, Lanqn, which is Lanqin. And what is Lanqin? Well, Nanjing. It's been written in several forms, Lanqin, Nanqin, Nanjing. So, and this is for one good. Imagine if we multiply this for more typologies of silk, then porcelain. So you get crazy. But we need to order this information into a database. And here more documents of companies selling through credits goods from China made of silk. Then another much more complex, the first historical archives in Beijing, the Imperial Palace, the archives in which here, in this minute, by Qianlong, the 23rd year, the Canton Custom mentioned the silvers, the tiles, here for only 1 year or several ships. So it was a profitable market. And of course, all these sources in traditional Chinese or even in Manchu. So also here in the Ricci Institute, in the collection we have in the previous, in 2012, before the flood of the old library. So it was these really nice documents from the, actually this is from the Archivo Secreto del Vaticano in Rome. So the names of travelers and missionary work in China, here in Kangxi Emperor. So here the names of people from the Dominican Order, San Francis, even some Jesuits here. So we have this information on the whole area of Jiangnan to see who are the participants, the network, the social agents in this market. And through our database, we have identified in Jiangsu, Zhejiang, and Shanghai the places of silk production: Nanjing for the Lanqin, Hangzhou, Suzhou, all this area basically that were acting as the export area of silk and also the entry area of American silver, that of course that silver was not declared to the Qing estate but was using to launder money for the land sales, and therefore making very rich families that were posing a threat to the Qing dynasty. So That is one of the main theories. And therefore, the logic I'm gonna hear in much more other documents, banning of China silks. And we have here and clustering the social network analysis to study the distribution of these typologies of silks, a whole universe in local places in South Spain, in Seville, for the huge consumption of Chinese silks that were entering the Mediterranean market. And I will finish with the wine question that is interesting. Again, introduction, huge amount of European wines into China, documents, the proof. This is, with your permission, I'm here, okay, to the people I'm debating. I'm like Santo Tomas. You want the proof, right? So like here, what is the proof of this of this European wine? So the proof, the Spanish sources in the National Archive, here the wine trademark, the quality, first A quality, second category. So there was a typology according to the quality of the wine. Here, the name of the Spanish galleon in the year 1771, which is, yes, the name of the ship, Nuestra Señora del Rosario, Our Lady of, I don't know how to translate Rosario in Rosary. Okay, Our Lady of Rosary. So that is the translation of the Spanish galleon. And here the whole cargo, types of Spanish wines and liquors. And here, again, this is from the National Archive of Spain, and this other one from the Swedish grill company in the Historical Archive of Macau. Here in Macau, you have very nice sources. I'm very happy that anytime I go there, I'm alone, and there are no competitors of mine or researchers, so more nice things for me. So in the cargo, again, in the Nuestra Señora, Our Lady of the Rosary, arrived in Manila in this year. The original price of one bottle of wine that was exiting the port of Seville and Cadiz, the price per unit was like 3 or 2 silver pesos, right? But then after this cargo arrived to Manila, that take nearly 1 year to arrive from Seville or Cadiz to Manila. Because imagine a little ship crossing the Atlantic, the Pacific. So imagine the typhoon of today. So imagine 500 years ago. So the same quantity was selling the market of Macao and Canton like maybe 6 or 7 times higher the original price. So the same bottle here, 22, 25 silver pesos. Huge money. Today we say, oh, these guys are cheating, or maybe they're using but that's why the wine market and price volatility in Canton that was not regulated. The state, the Qing state, regulate this? Of course not. It was all in hands of the Canton and Macao merchants. So huge amount of money, and it is believed, again, the grill letters, the grill Swedish company within this profitable market. You know what the Europeans were doing with this silver accumulated in this market from wine, tea, porcelain, and silk. For the case of the Swedish, late 18th century, all that money, the benefit, the profit obtained in this market, they were using in Sweden to overthrow the Swedish monarchy, the King Gustav of Sweden. And in the case of the America, the British that were entering this market, they were funding the independentist movements in South America against the Spanish Empire. The first one was Mexico and Uruguay. So that was the key question is here. One could be the profitable market of wine that can answer this big. So the conclusion is that we are in a geopolitical turmoil in this period in which the key point unregulated market. The attraction for these new goods, new commodities, the same as tobacco. because who introduced tobacco in China in the 17th century? The Portuguese through Macau. And then that is what I call the vicarious consumption theory. You create a market, you create a need where there is no market. The case of tobacco, and then they were very attractive commodity for the Chinese. And then the next one, you have the opium. You have already the market created. It's the same, the same logic as we can make here a sociological or anthropological study. The same as today, we have many. We have a new market created in the last 2 years. So this is the main conclusion on this. I'm gonna finish with I'm gonna put you on on a short video I prepared, how my team, we have created this database and create this kind of work in the different archives. So, okay, here I give you a really quick snapshot of our work in the historical archive in Spain, in Seville. Here, it's a little bit slow. My researchers mining the data from this huge amount of documents, searching for Chinese sales and the goods that we are looking for, and we are inputting in our system in the GESEM project database. This is one of the first prototypes. Now the database has been much more improved. So here, basically, first we register the reference of the archive we are working here, the local historical archive in Seville, but we are working in the archive of Macau, China, the historical archive, the first historical archive in Beijing, and so on. So, here we register the information of the catalog of the document, and then later, right here, we register the commodities, the Asian good, in this case, silk from China, that we are identifying in the document. And as I mentioned before, you can see here is the Nanking, identifying the type of silk and the origin, in this case, from China. Then we make here the social network analysis, the name of the actor, the participants in this trade, the name of the traders here in the market of Seville. And then later we operate here we operate the data output doing the social network analysis. We make a typology, we export the data to the HEFI software. I don't know if you're familiar with the social network analysis. So all the data, we export it here in the software, and we are drawing the network, the typologies of goods here. We apply a geo layout algorithm. So here, all the data are located in the precise latitude and longitude in the place that we are studying, and they were operating this data. These data are made through a partition of silk typologies here in the Parises of Seville, 18th century. So as you can see here, the different parishes of Seville, Santa Ana, Santa Maria, Santa Magdalena, and then we make the algorithm in which we can evenly distribute and see the network of that represent Chinese silks in, and then we project a satellite map in which we can see the representation of the consumers in the city of Seville, and we project over the satellite map the historical map in which we see the consumption of this. And then I will is the new software.
Hello everybody, I'm Manuel Perez-Garcia, Principal Investigator of GESEM project Global Encounters between China and Europe and founded by the European Research Council. The main objective of the project is to have a better understanding of China and Europe international relations within an historical perspective. The project is hosted by the Pablo Olavide University in Seville, and the main partner is Shanghai Jiaotong University, the School of Humanities. This way we are creating a very diverse team, as well as partners from China, Europe and the Americas, for a better understanding of the still unknown China world. For more information about the project, please visit our website. We have open access publication. Please visit www.gesem.eu.
Professor Manuel Perez-Garcia's research project Global Encounter between China and Europe, and funded by the European Research Council, is quite important not only for the School of Humanities but also for Shanghai Jiaotong University, which have put a lot of emphasis on its collaborations with universities and institutes from all over the world. More significantly, it has also contributed greatly to a mutual understanding between China and Europe. For the School of Humanities, I believe one of its missions is to make Chinese culture more accessible to the world. Therefore, we have maintained various exchange programs with foreign universities and institutes, and have also supported our colleagues and students to work with experts from all over the world.
I'm Xiaohua Si. I'm very happy to be involved in the GESEM project. This project uses new technologies and computer databases to simulate the consumption and trade networks between China and Europe, and therefore bring new insights on the relationship between West and East 100 years ago. It is such an honor for our center to work with the GESEM team. Our center will draw together research and expertise to investigate the application of computational technologies to the arts and humanities.
Well, this is it. So thank you guys.